streamed on the Council's YouTube channel in audio form only, so it doesn't matter what we look like today. I know you've made an effort. Sorry, I haven't, so I don't feel so bad. But thank you all those who have made a big effort. Do we have any declarations of interest? That appears to be none. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Merrill and Councillor Tipple and Councillor Karini Guvangam.
And I'm just going to say at this point, just to extend the fact that she might even be listening in, but Caroline's not been very well. So I know she's not on this committee, but she's been unwell since returning from a trip abroad and been in hospital. So hopefully she's on recovering. I'm sure, knowing how interested she is in all matters, she's probably listening live to us. She's probably one of our 3 listeners. So let's hope so. Yeah, whole 3. Yeah, we're doing well. 50% increase. Item 3, minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held 12th of March. Do we have any comments on them? I read them the other day and they seemed good to me, so much so that I used them as the basis of my report to Cabinet. But no, I think we're happy to accept them. That's a fair and accurate record. Thank you. Chairman's announcements. I have none other than to say that I've been speaking with Sinead, and Sinead has been more speaking to me about arranging a little bit of extra training, which was mentioned at the end of the previous meeting by Emma, just around how we can better our scrutiny, our questioning, the angles we come in at things at. So there will be some dates coming forward hopefully shortly regarding that. That's not meant to cast aspersions on anybody's contribution so far, but how we can sharpen them up and make them even better. Public speaking.
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Wouldn't it be nice if we did one time? I think it would be. Yeah, I'll probably regret saying that, but okay, we move on then to item 6, the cost of living review, which has been led by Kerry. And Mike, sorry. That's only it says Kerry on here. I wasn't going to give Mike any credit. If he's not on my list, then he's not coming in.
Thank you, Chair. Does that mean I can go home? That's good. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Committee. So just a bit of background before Kerry goes into some of the detail. So this was an audit that was completed in January 2024. So this was 2023, sorry, where just at the time when we were handing out some of those key grants that are coming through the system in terms of central government for cost of living and some of those heating bills, etc. So we were putting through a huge amount of grants, and what's useful for us is to start thinking about how we do that, making sure that we're targeting the right people and making sure that we focus on the systems and the procedures we need to do to ensure that money is well spent. We've got a culture at the council, a really positive culture in terms of support first, and ensure that we make sure that those who really need that help get it. And sometimes that means that through our grant giving, for example, on a Friday afternoon, that we will ensure that an individual will receive support when they need it. And what we do is, and Kerry will elaborate on this, is to ensure that our individuals and our residents are supported with practical support on the day with financial help. And then we will look at how that individual will be supported in the future. So to ensure that they have that money for the weekend or that night, but then we can look at that longer term support. So that's one of the areas that we really focus on for the council. And as you see through the grant report, looking at kind of where the report landed at the time that it was completed, we were looking at a huge amount of demand for grants coming through the system, and making sure that we conduit those grants out and then where it's needed. It's been a really useful learning point for us, and I think in the future we are going to see far more demand coming through for small pockets of grant funding. And what we've got to do as a council and a system is ensure we react to those grants quickly and properly. And so one of the things that one of the actions we will be looking about is how do we ensure that we have good governance. So this is taxpayers' money. We need to ensure that it's flowing and we've got record for it. But what we don't do is we don't slow it up through poor governance procedures and then slow it up to so it doesn't get out to our residents as quick as we can. So there's an area that we'll want to focus on there. We also know that one of the issues that we have is affordability and cost of living. So we know that it's getting harder for our residents to focus on finances and support. What we know in terms of the average wage for South Norfolk and Broadland is around £23,000 to £24,000 a year. That's if you take out the top 5%. If you add in the 5%, it's about 30,000. But for the target audience we're looking at. But we know, and these are figures from last year, but we know that to really comfortably live at the moment, you're looking at around 28,000 a year. If you want to live in the private rented sector, you're looking at around about 32,000 a year. And if you want to live in the private rented sector and save for a mortgage, you're looking at about 38,000 a year. Now those figures are based on last year around 15%, and we know it come down. But the principle we're trying to get across here is when you look at the wage for our poorest families around 23,000, there's a challenge there in how we support that cost of living work. So we know we've got challenges, and we know that we need to look at where we go for the future. But the specific topic tonight is around the audit of the work that we do, and what we want to really focus on tonight is just ensuring that we have got robust procedures in place. We're confident that we have, and we've got some learning points that we can bring up. Kerry, is there anything you want to bring into?
There is. I think now. So, as Mike said, this audit took place looking at what we did in the winter, not the one just gone, the one we're coming out of, but the one before that. And that was quite early on in things like the Household Support Fund and that sort of stuff. So obviously there's been a lot of learning since then, and we're much more au fait with it now, which is brilliant. But what this audit doesn't do, because it's really hard to audit this stuff, is to look at the work that we did collectively as teams right across the council to really tackle this issue without any more money. And that's hard to audit. What we do in the hub is hard enough on a day-to-day basis. But what this report isn't able to cover, because it doesn't fit in that kind of world, is the stuff that we did to bring all of our frontline teams together, whether they worked in my team, Richard's in housing, whether they were from leisure or from economic development. We had a really excellent working party that was meeting on a regular basis to think about how can we better manage our existing resources, because whilst there was a little bit of grant funding that went to our customers, it didn't really do everything that we needed it to. What else could we do to provide stuff for people? And there were some really low-key things that happened that aren't articulated in here, little things that we were able to do, resource that we were able to pull together, and actually just the tenacity of our members of staff to make the best out of something really small. So where you've got a customer, really thinking a little bit more creatively about what we do, you know, knowing about the local. It's not just about knowing about local food banks, it's knowing about really localised levels of support that you'd only know if you lived in Aylsham or in Coltishall or even smaller villages and towns that we've got. And this can't articulate that well enough. So I'm not going to bore you with all the detail, but just really bear that in mind, that this went alongside a lot of the, what some of us might refer to as more fluffy stuff that you can't write down in these kind of documents, and how important that was. And this work continues now. So although it was an audit of something that happened two winters ago, this continues to be our bread and butter in the Help Hub. We've talked to many of you guys about some of the challenges we have around the health inequalities work, and that's how people's health is impacted by things like a lack of finance or a lack of access to services, and this all ties in with that. So an audit is dry, but the work that we do isn't always. So obviously we welcome as many questions as you've got, because this isn't necessarily as reflective as it could be of the stuff that we've done, purely because of what an audit is.
thank you very much. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask or clarify? Shane?
Right, just one small point of clarification, please. On page 19, 6.1, there's either a missing word or there's a typo, and I can't work out which is which, pertaining to the word council.
That's embarrassing, but thank you, Councillor Ward. So I don't know, Kerry does it, I do it and look at it, but it should be the council's finances. My apologies for that.
Thank you. Fran?
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to, there's a few questions I want to ask. Okay, there are a few. But first of all, I just wanted to say, you know, on here, it's actually on page 24, we talk about the judgment really and the call there. And I'm really pleased, and I've always been pleased, that obviously our focus is always people over paperwork. So, and I know obviously with an audit, we've got to look at the paper trail, etc., etc. So that was some of the questions I was going to ask, right? But that is an overriding thing, really. On page 21, it refers to the Gold Command Group meetings, and there's been none since March even, 2023. Can I ask, you know, when we've got them planned for, so that obviously this will be ongoing. And the other thing is around communications. Obviously, there's comments here made about actions, basically people not being given support because there's been a breakdown in communication between community connectors particularly and others there. And I just wondered what was in place there. And I was talking about the recording system, Uniform, which it sounds as if it wasn't particularly great. And I wondered if we were still having to use that or whether or not there was a better system that we could use. And obviously, and also on from that really was around, you know, if we are still using Uniform or another one, is there any way of stopping the duplication? Because I was saying on page 30, thereabouts, it was talking about duplication. So there was an enormous amount of duplication. So obviously we don't want that because that's wasting someone's time if you're doing something twice rather than once. So that's what it is. But the overriding thing is I'm very pleased with what we do, and you know that. Thank you.
So with regard to the gold group, so when we started to talk about cost of living a long time ago, we looked at implementing a similar structure to what we had during the pandemic, which was a gold, silver command type structure. And that worked to an extent, but the work around cost of living wasn't as to the moment every single day. So we held the gold group, and that was what that lost was its momentum as the weather got warmer and funding dried up, because a lot of the government funding that we got was really relevant to those colder winter months. It was about fuel payments and that sort of stuff, and we all love that moment where we can turn the heating off, and ultimately that kind of came around that time, and it lost the necessity for it. But that didn't disappear. There was always the option to stand that group up again at any point that we needed to, and that included Mike and myself and Jamie and what have you, so, and other people from across the council. So the gold group did stop, but it stopped with good reason. It stopped to prevent us having meetings for meetings' sake. And where we fell down was that we didn't write down specifically why it had stopped. So for an auditor, that isn't ideal, but we knew collectively that there was a reason for ending that group as it was. When it comes to those cases, we've gone through those with a fine tooth comb. There are no cases that have been left outstanding. Where they came from in this audit, we've gone through. It was a case of cost checking things, and like you said, that lack of access to system. If we have a dream, and we've talked about this in a number of committees lately, it is about that recording system for us. We absolutely make the best of what we've got, but it's by no means perfect. But we work tirelessly, and I feel absolutely confident that no customers are slipping through the net. It is just a little bit more tedious for our staff than we would like it to be. And if we had a magic wand, then we'd absolutely have one. But we've looked at every single case that's gone through this, and those beyond. We don't have a problem with that. I'm pleased to report back.
Thanks for that. So when you're saying tedious, does that mean tedious in as much as it's taking you a lot longer to do something than it otherwise should do? And if that is the case, obviously collectively that's an enormous amount of time that we can't be spending looking after our customers, our residents, and therefore should it be something we should look at investing in to actually reduce that time, because obviously we can spend it better. Thank you.
I'll never say no to that, but it's it's really it's a big challenge, and as you can imagine, my team are quite used to having to work across different systems, not just internally. You know, we check this for every case. We cross-reference that with the police, children's services, adult social care. So the absolute epitome of wonder would be that we would have across the public sector one single system that fits everybody. There's also more chance of me popping to the moon after this meeting, unfortunately, because that's incredibly difficult. There's obviously step downs from that don't involve such big hopes and dreams, and they're things that we're working on all the time, and what can we do with that? But we make the best of it. There would be a better system if we could get it all, but it's finding one that exists. We operate a very unique service here at the council that isn't perhaps replicated in other parts of the country. So you're not going to buy off the shelf a district council system that allows us to do what we need to do, because what we do is quite extraordinary.
And I think just to add to that, Councillor Mike, I think it's just, you know, when you look at social care, but I've just implemented a revenues and benefits system, implemented a housing system, we're about to, that's about to come through the system, and because they're built for those specific targets. And I think, you know, we're looking at, for example, CNC, who have tablets which go out, you know, and then you can log on, and you're absolutely right to pick up, and it's something that, you know, I've escalated centrally. So, you know, it's not that we're not doing a job, it's you end up duplicating, and then it just takes time, and that's something, the more we can use electronic systems to reduce that work, and I can absolutely see from an auditor's point of view, because it is quite dry, you know, if you've got a bit of paper here and then this log there, and then, you know, you always get worried about that sort of stuff. But if we can log it, and if we can have it, but that's certainly, as Kerry said, that's the ambition, at least to have it on our side, and if in the end we can also jump it in with, you know, other partners as well, that would be even better.
Can I just ask, I'll come back to you in a minute, Shane. You obviously mentioned the processes and the time and all the rest of it. Is this something which is being, I always get the wrong acronyms or the wrong way of doing it, but the customer experience programme, and that's about looking at the IT and the systems of the council and about having everything linked up a bit more. Is this being fed into that so that we can use that to make the process more efficient for you?
Yeah, Chairman, that's exactly the, so it's going into the customer service work stream to see whether we can, you know, we can use that as part of it. So yeah, that will tie in.
Shane.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking at page 28, item 7, under the recommendations, where it talks about procedural guidance and needing to be reviewed. I mean, it seems to me like you're dealing with apples and oranges so many times that you know, is the process or the guidance given, is it like a one-size-fits-all, or are you likely to custom make various different sort of procedures, and how would that fit into a computerised system?
Great question. Unfortunately, every grant that we're allocated comes with different criteria, and you'll be pleased to know that the Household Support Fund will be starting again in the new financial year, which is next week, and we still don't have the exact guidance for what that will look like. So we are always at the last minute. They want us to go home, turn the lights out. We're always often to the minute trying to work out what it is that we need to do. Luckily, they follow a similar format, so we're able to bend and shift to it. So you could make a system potentially that's pretty generic, and we would fit within that. But really, this is about what do our residents need, and how can that grant meet those needs is our main question with all of this. So the short answer is yes, everything's slightly different. Everything.
And I think that is a good point, Councillor Ward, in terms of, you know, when we looked at the housing, for example, the heating bills, it came down from central government, a very strict criteria. You know, this is the amount that you'll give for this household, and it was easy to work through. But as Kerry said, with Household Support Fund, and you know, one, it's the criteria is coming in late, but there's also not a defined exact criteria. And I would say, in the way that we've learned over these last couple of years, is to react to that lack of criteria and ensure that we've got our own confidence and put our own criteria in. And actually, in the end, what works best is if we get a pot of money from central government, say, look, we want it in generally this area, but you go away and work it. And that's the bit that works really well. And when we build up the experience in that knowledge, now that will always be inconsistent with a auditor, because the auditors like to know exactly where you're going. But actually, in terms of the customer journey, customer experience, that's a much better way of doing it. So you know, we've learned that from moving forward, and we'll want to continue that.
I will just, there's a couple of other things I'd like to just note here. Astonished actually by that figure. 38,000 is what you're saying, really is the figure for someone to be earning to be able to even think about getting on the housing ladder within our area. I mean, that prices out an enormous number of people in my profession as teachers with large student loans and the like who are never going to reach that point. Includes junior doctors, I believe, also, and many others. So, yes, it's a bit of a shock to people who probably assume that anyone earning 38,000 is earning quite a lot, but it's actually not really when you think about it locally. It seems to me that a lot of what you're saying is that you're looking to, obviously people have got, you mentioned all the lack of finance, the lack of access to certain things that they need immediately, but to what extent do you think what you're doing is basically providing people with filling that gap where they've got a lack of access to information about where things are available? I mean, I know the Help Hub essentially does that, but how much, as a ballpark figure, do you think it's actually just saying, you know, this is there to help you, there are things ready for you, but just, you know, how much of your time is spent doing that instead of actually giving out cash?
Huge amounts, and that's really what we want to be doing. So we want as little number of people being at that crisis point as possible. Where they are at that crisis point, though, we want to be able to give it to them, always on a Friday. We always joke about this, there's always someone on a Friday. But go back to them and talk to them and look at their situation. We wouldn't leave them hungry or cold or anything like that, but we would then look at everything that's going on. But our dream, and where we've invested money within the team, is to get people when there's first a problem. I used to collect rent in a housing association, and when we first got there, we would start every month and we'd look at it and we'd say, right, they owe the most, we'll start with them. That was the wrong way to be doing it. We absolutely should start at the bottom where people have just missed one payment, and then talk to them about how we prevent them from missing any more. And that's exactly what we want to do with people in the widest possible sense. We want to get to them as soon as they have a problem, and a huge amount of the communication that we do through the Help Hub is, as soon as you have a problem, come and talk to us to prevent it from escalating. The old kind of dripping tap analogy is really important. So we invested, when we looked at how we could bolster our debt and welfare team, we didn't look at investing in people who have got all the experience in dealing with big levels of debt. We talked about people who are good at chatting to people about how do you make your ends meet, you know, what changes do you need to make in order to be able to afford your bills in the long term, because everyone's had to tighten their belt. You've rightly mentioned that people that you'd assume on a good wage actually struggle to live, and certainly to progress into home ownership. So it's talking to them about what they might be able to do to achieve that. So while we deal with the crisis, we try and put a huge emphasis on prevention of that crisis, because that's ultimately much better.
Has anybody else got anything else that they'd like to add? Can I just summarise by saying thank you very much. I think we're all enormously grateful for the work that the Help Hub and everything that you achieved through all you know, that this shows you have achieved. We know that you mentioned that you're trying to avoid further financial obligations and increasing that, but I guess there may come a point where you're having to look towards that. Perhaps you'll keep us aware and bring any information regarding that in the future to let us know about any possible implications, cost implications in the future. But thank you ever so much. I mean, the recommendations are simply to comment on the report, which I think we've had, for officers to take forward any actions. I think if anybody's got anything else to add, I think we just leave it at that. And thank you very much for your report and the work you do. We then move on to item 7, working with housing providers, and Richard. Thank you, Richard. Oh, Mike's staying. Felt so aggrieved not being mentioned in the previous one. He said, I'm not budging now. I'm staying here for the duration.
Not all, Chair. No, it's not going to work here. So you've turned me off. That's it.
So, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Committee. So I'm here to present Working with Housing Providers updated report. It's a report that keeps coming back every quarter just to provide an update on how things are going with our housing providers. I won't go through the recommendations because I went through them last time, and they're available on page 40, section 2.1, if you did want to review them. So to give you an update on each recommendation. Unfortunately, recommendation 1, there isn't a massive amount of update. Nick Howard continues to work on this item very hard with the landlords just to try and get the ASB SLA over the line. So unfortunately, if we can carry that forward to the next meeting, that would be wonderful. I will move on to the other recommendations, however, where there has been a bit of an update. So as you can see in the report, previously we talked about getting a service level agreement and some performance measures. That was the initial aim. Then upon looking over those potential aims and also considering that central government are taking this matter very, very seriously as well, they started to provide their own targets. So there was a bit of a fear of if we create the targets which are slightly different to the government targets, then they're not going to measure our targets, they'll measure the government targets, so we might as well step in line with the government targets, in short. Okay, they're starting to report on those now, and I've detailed some of the information they provided within there. To summarise, statutory minimum repairs, they're all over it, they're covering it very, very well. So that's like your gas checks, they're to make sure health and safety is there. So the houses are safe. They're safe within our district, which is very good. Emergency repairs are going very well. So when there's a flood or when there's heating issues, gas issues, that will get repaired as well. Where they continue to struggle is non-urgent repairs. So they aim for 90% to be completed within 28 days. Present is sitting around 72%, which is far lower than we would hope for. But on the back of the results, they now have to survey their residents and they have to publish the survey results. At present, they're only achieving a 65% average for their repairs, not urgent repairs. As we've said, this is not where they want to be. Previously mentioned talking about service level agreement. We have asked this again. However, once again, been pushed back to say the government targets are there and they have to publish them. We don't necessarily need an SLA because they're essentially published, and if they're not good enough, then they're I don't want to say shame. It's not shamed, but it's pointed out to them where they need to improve. So we don't need to step in there. And they're held to account nationally. The other problem we have with an SLA is it's okay dealing with someone like Saffron because they're very local. You can deal with that person individually on a local footprint. If I go to Clarion and say, right, I want you to change your whole organisation and I want you to meet the needs of Broadland District Council, I might get pushed back somewhat because I've got so many hundreds of thousands of properties. So at least by sticking with the government targets, that's works. The final part of recommendation 2 is about data sharing. So what we found was the data sharing agreement was suitable, fit for purpose. We are, having reviewed it, we are going to tie it down a little bit more. Any document you review, you find some issues, so we are looking to review. We're going to be doing this for October when our new system comes into place. The issue was more regarding the Office of Fear. They were worried about sharing too much. We've had a number, I said before, we had a number of data breaches over a year and a half ago. Since then, they've basically been tight-lipped, and that could be at the detriment of our residents as much as it could be in the positive. We don't want to be sharing data that we don't need to, but we do need to be sharing the data, which will really help them. We've done robust training on the 19th. We're also going to be adding this item onto one-to-ones, and we've got case reviewing officers, and they're going to be looking over the cases to make sure we are sharing the information with our landlords as much as we should do. The final recommendation was regarding a housing strategy to improve long-term housing availability. Within previous reports, we've been saying that there's a piece of work being completed. Unfortunately, this piece of work highlighted that we already know a lot of the information that we required, and it's within our housing needs assessment. The last housing needs assessment was completed in 2001, though, and it lasts for a period of 5 years. So we're halfway through, and the world has changed. Is facing very different challenges. However, that is what is delivering our housing through our planning team. What we're going to do, therefore, sorry, just to rephrase my word, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've got a wheel, we need to review the wheel, and we need to have a look to make sure whether there's a gap analysis that needs to be done within that to then influence further delivery moving forwards. Okay. A couple of other things to note, which I saw which has moved on since writing this paper. Within here, we also talked about voids. We had the Housing Alliance, which is where all the local landlords and all the district councils come together. I have the joy of chairing that, which actually works really, really well. Void turnaround came up within that. One housing association, Victory, has seemed to have resolved the issue. So we all started talking about using them as an example. It became apparent that all landlords could learn from them. So we're going to facilitate all landlords coming together. That's their void team and their asset management team coming into a room, get all 16 landlords all in a room, start sharing some information, start sharing some learning, and we're going to lead and facilitate that. Okay, that's my end of my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? I'll ask Simon, then I'll come to you later, Shane.
There we go. Just on the question of the voids, why does it take 3 to 6 months from them saying, yes, I'll have the property, to them getting it? Is it a legal issue? Is it a... Yeah.
So it's a couple of reasons there. One of them I'm going to put the fault of housing association. The other one is about resource. The first one is some advertise it at point of notice. So they don't know what the state of that property is when that previous resident hands in a notice. That could be an eviction. It could be any reason why that tenancy is ending. They immediately advertise it. It's their procedures, that's how they want to do so. The problem is they don't know what their assets are like because you possibly haven't gained access to that house for a number of years. So you advertise it, someone bids on it, gets the property, then they get into the property and then realise that it needs a substantial amount of work. Then the void turnaround starts. That's when you come into the resource side of things. Twofold. One, they're struggling to recruit the number of people that they need to do the actual repairs. The second part, I hear time and time again, is damp is causing them more of a problem because it's the same teams. So they go to work on a void, they receive a call about damp. Damp is so sensitive an issue, justifiably, but that crew, because they're a crew, gets pulled in to go and visit that other property. So that void work, which required a team to go in there and blitz it, is being pulled left, right and centre to be able to do it. So it's prolonging the time in which they do that void work. But I hope if Victory's managing to do it, let's learn from Victory. Let's all the other housing associations figure out why they're doing it. They have an in-house team. It's not that they've got better contractors. They have an in-house team like many others do. So what are they doing within an in-house team that others aren't?
Shane, you were first, then I'll come to you.
Thank you. If we go back to the previous report, there were surveys that were asked of all of the housing associations, and they came back with questions that they wanted to answer, and not necessarily the ones that were being asked. Has there been any uniformity or sort of cohesiveness to these questions? Because I mean, obviously, you know, the reports you come back, the more uniformity you get, the easier it is to work.
So the TSMs have now been agreed. and they're the ones that they have to do. They have to answer. But the only downside to this is it's not going to be quarterly like we would like them to be. They are yearly. They have to publish them yearly. Whilst that's frustrating for us, they have got thousands and thousands of properties, so it does take some time to be able to collate that information. So there is uniformity, to add to your answer, to be able to provide, say, it's like our staff survey. If it comes out negative, it looks like it's bad all year, but it's not. Things have improved throughout that year. That's exactly the same what's going to happen with these surveys. We've got to utilise what we've got, though. And our staff survey was not negative. I don't want that to come be recorded.
Jonathan?
Yeah, just a quick question. In your professional opinion, obviously you've said about Victory and how obviously they're managing it. Is it easier for us as a council to work with the smaller providers like Saffron and Victory, or Clarion? Obviously Clarion, in theory, you've got more resource, they've got more bigger teams, and so in theory you'd think, well, that would be easier because they would be bigger, but then does it become ungainly because they're too big? So just from your profession, is it easier for you, as in, or is it easier to work with the smaller or the larger companies?
I pick and choose depending on the thing in which we want to do. So, for example, if we want to do a really bespoke local DA aspect, we went to Saffron and we leased 2 properties from them because it's really easy to do through Saffron. It's a local priority, so we can do that. If I went to Saffron and said, can you buy a load of houses, they're going to struggle because they have such a long-term plan. But our Broadland's Housing First properties have all been delivered through Clarion because they have bigger pockets, and therefore they can say, we're going to do this government initiative, and therefore it's worthwhile going to Clarion. In respect to the voids, though, it doesn't really matter how big or small you are, you have to do voids. So although it's Clarion, their void team will be a local team. It won't be the same team going around the whole of the country. They'll have a local regional team. So the issues that they're facing is on a local level when it comes to the void aspect and repairs.
And I just say to add that from housing standards point of view, when the team talk, it boils down to relationships, and that's the key bit. So whether big or small, if you have a good working relationship, then you tend to get stuff done. Kevin's team with housing standards takes virtually 0 cases to enforcement in terms of damp and mould, and that's because we have a good relationship policy or relationship with the providers, both big and small. And when you look at, as Richard said, someone like Clarion, I mean, they're massive, but they're also about 2 minutes down the road, so, and Sally we know really well, and really good provider, Saffron just down the road in Long Stratton. So it is that if you get a good relationship and the excellent bit of work which is about to do with the void stuff, let's just get people in a room, have a cup of char, and then just talk it through, and that makes a difference.
No, I was just pressing the wrong button. Talk me through these voids. By void, I suppose we mean empty without tenancy, yeah? So how is it that these housing associations don't have regular checkups to see what the state of the property is? I mean, in the private sector, you'd have at least an annual check to see if everything was working satisfactorily or whether anything needed repair or so on and so forth. But are you telling me that doesn't happen with these housing associations? And if so, why? I mean, it's crazy. How are you going to keep a track of your investment in your property if you don't go and check it regularly? And another question, what is a non-urgent repair? What constitutes that?
I'll do the first one first. Second one, I'll give my best go at. But so I used to work in a housing association, and we used to work very, very hard to get into a property every 5 years. You've got 2 different kinds of inspection, though. You've got a gas inspection, and you have to get into that property for a gas or a safety inspection. So even if you've got electric heaters, you still have to have a safety inspection every year. That's your statutory minimum. When I looked through the targets, every single housing association had 100% target with that because, of course, you can't have a target which is less than that, because if there's a problem, that's going to be an issue. But you go in, you do the gas check, you leave. You don't do a structural check. You don't do the other aspects of a check that you require. When you normally do the checks is at void or mutual exchange. You will do it at mutual exchange, because what you often find is someone's knocked down a wall that they shouldn't have knocked down, and then that can cause a big problem. Resource is resource. Quite simply, resource. You would need a whole team to be going round to every single property. Yep. I agree. I agree. Oh, and the other one was, what's a non-urgent repair? I'm going to say, I don't know right now. An urgent repair, I would say an urgent repair is something that, I would say an urgent repair is something you cannot live in that property and therefore you have to leave. So the non-urgent repair would be something like a leaking tap. So you've got a pipe gushing out water, that's an urgent repair. A leaking tap is, you can live with it for a little while. Is that all right?
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Jim. I know we've done a lot of work to really forge positive links with the providers, and I think it's really good. And just the void work with Victory, that's fantastic. We get one together and sort that out. So I think that's really good. You answered most of my questions really, as I expected. But what I was going to ask is, what conversations have gone on, because the social housing regulator comes into play from next month. So what, if any, conversations have gone on about that? And do you think that the providers are really sort of thinking, oh, hang on, we've got to up our game? Or do you think it will make a little difference until they get a massive fine? I know there's a lot of supposition there, sorry, but I just think it's important, because obviously it's kicking in the next few weeks, isn't it? So that could make a huge difference to some people. And obviously I know outside of Broadland, thank goodness, obviously Clare and R have got some major problems. We know that. So I think in other areas they may be hit with massive fines. Hopefully they won't here, and our residents won't have to put up with they're not putting up with what they're doing elsewhere. But I just wondered if those conversations have started and where they are. Thank you.
So it's been a key subject, as you'd expect, of the Housing Alliance. It's the one situation where all housing associations get together. So we've used it as an opportunity to review each of the guidance that comes out and train them. Just last week we had, it was flagship providers, because the Ombudsman Code is changing as well. And the Complaints Code, which is going to Cabinet next week? No, Thursday. So on Thursday. So they, Flagship have done a tremendous amount of work over that, and they provided a presentation to everybody, and we all made sure that we're doing the same thing. To add to that, we're also an RP. All of these things are now, we have to do the same. We are nowhere near, we do not have anywhere near the resource that they do to be able to invest the time and to make sure they are adhering to these aspects. So me sitting there, I'm sitting there writing notes all the time to make sure we also learn from them to meet our requirements with an RP. But in short, yes, over the last year, it's been every single quarter we've discussed it to make sure that they are all meeting their needs.
I've just got a couple of questions. The non-urgent repairs, the 90% target, is that the target figure we're going for? Target one for housing association regarding spares 90%. Is that a target which is a national target, agreed target, something which is based on best practice? Because I know we had this question at a previous meeting where we were talking about, for example, 90% was the figure for staff turnover, and it seems to be often a figure that's picked out. 90% sounds good, let's go for 90%, but is it something which is genuinely something that things have been measured against, or is it just a number that's been plucked out by someone, not saying here, but someone at some point in the past, and there's some reason for it being chosen?
It's the aspirations of the housing associations on a local level. It's not a national requirement. It's really you're compared against your friend or foes. You're compared rather than having a specific target. However, from a local side, a housing association has said they're going to a target for 90%, and I think the other ones are going, all right, we'll try and do the same. They haven't specifically said that they're going to aim for that, some of them, but I think that's going to be the rounded target. But they're a long way off, so it's going to take a little time for them to get there.
My other question, and I don't want you to have to go into any detail in this, but you mentioned 18 months ago some sort of data issues. Can you expand on that without going into anything which is going to get anyone in any trouble? Because obviously some of us weren't here 18 months ago, and it's interesting to note that obviously training has been received to deal with an issue, but we're like, I don't know if anyone else was like, oh, what's that issue? You know, so without getting anyone into any trouble, are you able to expand on that?
I'll be honest, but there was a couple of letters that unfortunately so when we were sending benefit letters out, unfortunately one letter went on top of another one, and then that got posted, and therefore that's a data breach. So because that happened a couple of times, I sent an email to say, please stop, in probably more robust ways. And the reaction to that has been a complete shutdown of some data sharing through just with our partners, our housing associations. So much data sharing happens within the Help Hub anyway. So the conduit for data sharing has not stopped. It's just when people are moving into a new house, the conduit in which we communicate is through our housing system. So we need to make sure that the relevant information is available to our housing associations on the housing system. And that's the only thing that needs to change. If someone was vulnerable, we probably would have shared that information through the Help Hub anyway. We would just need to make sure if there's any key little snippets that might build a picture, we need to make sure that that information is shared through the system.
So it's sort of genuine, inadvertent sharing rather than, because the way it could have been come across as that someone had been a bit loose-lipped, as it were, and the information was just a carelessness about something.
The only carelessness is that they had a lot of letters, and one letter, the front of one letter went on the bottom of another one. Human error can occasionally happen. I won't go into long details of the other things we put in, but we also stopped using people to put letters together, and we started using our iMail system, because then the computer does it all, and therefore it's not us.
Tony.
Can I just ask a further question regarding the non-urgent repairs? Obviously, the aspirational targets that you quoted, and I'm sure you're working very hard towards them. How does the current stat that you came up with compare historically, and how long have we been keeping these records?
For once, I'm going to sit here and say I don't know. Okay, I wouldn't know. I can try and find that out. It will be. The problem is you're going to end up going back to each housing association will measure it slightly differently, so you won't get clearly comparative data for that information. But I can always go back to the couple that did provide this information and just ask them a bit of narrative around whether they feel that that's poor in comparison to past or positive. I can do that, but I can't do much further. Sorry.
Thank you. If we've used up everyone's questions, wrong way of saying it, but everyone seems to be satisfied with that. And the recommendations again are to note the actions taken by officers and review progress and comments, which we've passed on. Thank you very much indeed to you both for explaining and answering our questions. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Chair.
We move on to item 8, Rural Business Builder Grant Programme. And thank you. Sorry, absolutely, yeah. You're welcome to George to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me start by introducing Paul Chapman, your Business Development Manager. Paul's small but perfectly formed team is responsible for delivering this grant programme and the business support function. Secondly, there are a lot of numbers in this report. I'll do my very best to make them as digestible as possible in this short presentation. So, the Business Builder Programme, a brief history. Broadland District Council received £428,573 from the Norfolk Strategic Fund to support economic recovery activities, and the Business Builder Support Programme launched in October 2022. This was intended to be, and is, a wraparound business support package that incorporates business advice, access to training, signposting to other supportive stakeholders and services, events, and grants to help facilitate business growth. This structure put Broadland in good stead for the expenditure of additional funding secured from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, UKSPF, which was £130,000, and the Rural England Prosperity Fund, REPF, which was £519,552, all of which further enhanced the programme's capabilities. Minimum intervention outcomes and outputs for UKSPF and REPF are listed in section 2.11 of the paper. So there are minimum targets for the programme. It's worth stating explicitly that this programme encourages businesses to invest in energy efficiency and environmental improvement. Publicity efforts include newsletters, events and social media, not least our regular business breakfasts, which are very well attended, I might add, and our annual business awards, which were recently held. But what does this look like in practice for business? So there are 4 types of support offered. There's foundation support, there are build-up grants, which are worth up to £1,000, development grants worth up to £5,000, and the main thrust of the conversation tonight is the Rural Capital Grant of up to £25,000, provided at a 50% intervention rate. As shown in the table in section 3.4 of the midpoint review, more than 180 businesses have been supported, with 81 grants paid already, resulting in Broadland investing £341,952 into businesses. For the Rural England Prosperity Fund, i.e. the Rural Business Builder Grant, applications have been received totalling more than £500,000, demonstrating the popularity of the scheme. Currently 12 businesses have received approval for grants, which are expected to create more than 40 jobs in Broadland. There are detailed case studies available on the website, and there are some in the paper, or there are some examples in the paper, but a couple of funding interventions that we've approved are providing equipment and training for a plumbing and heating business to expand its capacity for installing air source heat pumps, contributing to wider district decarbonisation. We've also provided funding for a specialist printing machine, enabling in-house production and diversification of product offerings. In conclusion, in-house delivery of the Business Builder programme has been effective in engaging with the local business community, resulting in substantial investments and support for business growth. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. George, anybody got anything they'd like to ask? Emma?
Press the right one. I think first of all it looks like it's been really successful and certainly things that benefit the businesses and benefit the residents has got to be a good thing. I've just got a query on the number of applications versus the number of businesses paid a grant to date. The number of businesses is less than 50% of those applied, and I just wondered if there are any common themes in why some applications hadn't gone all the way through.
Okay, so if you're looking at the totals there, you're comparing the 81 with 182, obviously you've got 43 in the foundation, in the first row, which is the foundation support. There's no grant available in that category, just advice, so that accounts for part of the difference. But then it's about, particularly when you get to the bigger projects, they take longer to come to fruition, so they'll come to us and they want to apply for support towards buying some equipment or some property development. We will, once we've got all the information from them, and they'll have to get quotes in and planning permissions through and all sorts of things, we will give them the approval, but we're then waiting on them to actually go out and spend the money before we're actually going to pay them the money. We pay everything in retrospect once they've actually incurred it, so we're not risking any money paid out up front.
Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So you give this money to the businesses. Do you follow them up? Do we have an idea of how many of them are still in business in 2 years' time or 3 years' time? Are you going to keep those figures? Thank you.
We will be, but within the life of the programme, I would say. I mean, this is a very short-lived government programme in the main, most of the funding, which runs through until March 25. There is some of it which we got available until June 25 from the original sum of money, but we don't know beyond that what the government's going to do, whether it's going to give us any more money or whether it's going to go to county council. So there comes a point where once we've delivered on the government's objectives and delivered their funding programme, we won't keep monitoring it for the sake of monitoring it.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, on that note, I understand the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is going to be devolved to county council rather than to ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean it can't come back, obviously, but I just wondered if you've had any preliminary discussions around that. Thank you.
We've certainly asked many questions about it. I think the detail that exists around what UK Shared Prosperity Fund looks like from March 25 are limited. Much of this fund was developed or has developed and changed throughout the programme of this fund. It's uncertain what the funding looks like. But we're certainly in regular contact with our county colleagues to look at what the future business support provision looks like for Broadland.
Shane.
Thank you. Just looking at 4.1 and 2, the proposed actions to continue with the programme, it seems like a sort of sensible move. But if you go to 5.2, there was a question around. I'm a bit confused by this because it says if you wanted to sort of pass it over to another body, it would be detrimental because it's too late. And if it's too late, then is it really an option?
It's a possibility. It's not a preferred option, but it is a possibility. There are challenges which are touched upon in that other options proposal, and there are certainly, as you've highlighted, some difficulties in doing so. But it is an option that could be feasible, but very challenging to deliver.
Sorry, but would there be any sort of reasoning as to why it would be an option at all?
All we've sought to do is propose alternative options for consideration. I don't think there is good justification for changing the approach because we've had real success in the delivery of the programme. The programme runs for another 12 months, particularly in terms of rolling the Prosperity Fund, and I hope the evidence in front of you tonight evidences that we're on the right path to meet the objectives and outcomes and outputs that we've committed to. But there are always other options worth exploring, so we've just tabled those for consideration and review.
Yeah, with this programme, other areas we're doing the same sort of thing as well. So we're not. Are we looking at it as attracting businesses to Broadland, or just supporting the businesses we've already got to expand? And where they were thinking, I could do that, but they just don't have that little bit of extra funding to do that. The support to make our businesses from small to medium, say.
I would say it's primarily supporting the businesses that are already here. If a business was setting up in the area and they came to us requesting fund, could they access the funds? Then yes, potentially they could as well if they were going to be setting up a premises in Broadland. But there's been very few of those. It's mainly been businesses that are here and are growing and seeking to grow.
Eleanor.
Yes, thank you. It sounds like it's been a very successful programme, so that's really good to see. And I just wondered, how much publicity have you done to advertise the work that's been going on here? What sort of publicity has gone out?
Publicity in terms of awareness of the grants or the success of how it's been going? Right. In terms of the awareness of the grants, well, we've got a newsletter which goes out to businesses on a fortnightly basis from my team. It goes to over 3,100 business contacts across Broadland and South Norfolk, so it's a very wide readership in that sense. It gets a sort of roughly 45% open rate every time, which is sort of statistically quite high. And we've done things like paid for Facebook advertising, so we get the availability of grants into everybody's feed in Broadland postcodes. We run the business breakfasts where we get a sort of 100 people at a time at those. There's been some door knocking, sort of leaflet dropping in market towns and other villages. So we've done quite a lot of work to sort of get the news out there. In terms of the success of the story, we're building up a whole series of case studies. There's a number that are on the website at the moment. But there's quite a few more in the pipeline that have been developed with our communications team that will go in things like the Broadland News, and there have been 1 or 2 stories in there already about the programme. But we're going to keep on sending out more and more of the case studies just to show what it's doing for local businesses.
It's interesting you mentioned case studies, because that fits in a little bit with what Simon was saying, Councillor Jones, about sort of being able to look back and check the success of the grants and how effective they've been. I mean, personally, I would hope that there would be some way, I know you said it's through the life cycle of the project that this would be looked at, but if we're using a criteria, it'd be quite nice to know how effective that criteria is in terms of what other grants and things the council gives out, and whether this can help us to be a little bit more focused on really supporting businesses who are putting more effective cases for why they need the funds, if you know what I mean. So what I'm saying is it'd be good if those case studies could in some way, even if it's a question of bouncing an email to someone and seeing whether you get a response to check they're still in business, or checking their website just to see if these businesses still exist, given that it's 81. I know that's probably half a day's work for somebody just to check if the companies are still in existence, but it would be nice, I would have thought, to have some sort of overall figure of saying if there's 81 businesses, 80 are still in business, and it's like, well, so that shows how it's been effective, because we know that so many businesses fail in the first year, and particularly I think around the money going to start a business. We know how many businesses fold in the first 2 years, 5 years, and if that has been effective and those grants really making a difference to them, then I think it really does show off how effective it is. So I know I'm making more of a statement than a question, but is that something that might be doable, or adding a little bit, or am I adding a lot of extra work by suggesting that?
I think it's certainly doable in terms of whether businesses are still operating, certainly. That as you say, it's a day's work, something like that. I mean, by the time we finish the programme, there'll be a lot more businesses that have come through this than the current numbers, but that's certainly doable. We do a lot of assurance work as part of the grant process, so we are looking at the financial standing of the businesses as well, so that we're sort of making sure that we're giving money where the business is on a fairly good footing already.
Paul, you want to ask something?
It's a really positive programme. It's good to hear. You've got funding in place up until June 2025. What's your feeling for getting other sources of funding between now and then? Is there much about, or is it really just waiting on government grants?
We're always optimistic. I think the funding horizon is inherently uncertain over the next 12 months, but we have historically been able to make a good case for either public sector or other investment into business support programs. We are confident we can make that case again. What those pots look, sound and feel like is yet to be determined, but we've got a number of irons and a number of fires, so watch this space.
I'm looking around and seeing that everyone seems very satisfied with your answers. I notice again that the recommendation is simply to note progress being made for the support programme. We don't need to vote on noting it, but I think we're all, unless anybody has any objections, I'll just say that we're all very happy with the progress you're making, and thank you very much indeed for your report. Thank you very much. And now we move over to Overview and Scrutiny Committee Annual Report 23-24, with Sinead giving us her report. I'm happy not to vote if people don't want the vote. I think I'm a no, it's not pecuniary or whatever interest is it. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides a factual summary of the work of this committee for the year 23-24, and it gets submitted to Council for presentation at the Council's AGM in May. The full annual report can be found in Appendix A, and that includes a summary of this committee's recommendations to Cabinet throughout the year, as well as a summary of the other work that Overview and Scrutiny has done. I suppose the last thing to say is we're proposing that outcomes from this meeting are included within the report after this meeting has concluded, and that will be agreed, or proposing that will be agreed by the Chair before we submit that to Council. Stop there for any questions.
Simon.
I'm just going to ask this question for Peter, because I know he'll be incredibly disappointed. It says to be completed following the meetings, Broadland Food Innovation Centre.
I was going to come on to that on the next item, but I'll cover it now. So the Food Innovation Centre report has been rescheduled to the next Overview and Scrutiny meeting, and that's really to allow for a full financial year to take place for that data to be included within the report. So you'll see that on the work programme for the next meeting in June.
So although we haven't covered it yet within the meeting, we have explained within the meeting why it hasn't been covered yet. But we've actually scheduled it this year to be discussed, so that's why it's mentioned within it. Does anybody have any comments or any other questions? So, I mean, obviously we want it to be a completely factual report, so if anybody's got any questions regarding any elements of it that they feel are not factual or correct, I think everyone seems fairly happy. No one's making...
Yourself, Chair, before. Did you write it yourself?
I did write it myself. Doing my, yeah, it was... Blimey, I'm quite good at writing. I teach it to children and everything. It's been one of my skills since I was little. Sometimes I write too much. I've got very good at editing, but yes. I did look at the style of previous reports so that I didn't go completely off topic and start writing a sort of novel. You know, the last thing I wanted, and then realise, oh, it's only meant to be about a page. So, yeah, kept it within the framework of what people expect. We've got recommendations for this. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show your votes now.
That appears to be unanimous, Chairman.
Wonderful. And at this point then we move over to the work programme and Sinead again.
Thank you. So I've covered the Food Innovation Centre report. So the only other update, you won't see it on the programme in front of you, is because I've only agreed it today with the officer. So we've agreed for the housing allocations policy review to come forward to the June meeting of this committee. So that will feature in the work programme for the next meeting.
Thank you. That brings this meeting to a close. At what, 6:38? If that's 7:38, should be able to learn how to tell the time. There I'm showing off about teaching writing, but I can't do time. I want to thank the committee again. It's the last couple of meetings. I think there's been a series of really good questions asked, and I think we've really dug down into reasons why things are happening. So thank you everybody for your excellent contributions. Thank you.